Hey, it's your host, Tori. Before we pick up where we left off, there are a couple things I'd like to say. Feel free to skip ahead, though. I won't be able to tell if you do. A couple of announcements first. After this episode, regular narrative episodes will go on hiatus. I've applied for the Phil Oakes Fellowship Grant from the Woody Guthrie Center, so I'm putting a pause on writing new episodes as I wait for a response, so I don't leave out pertinent information I may find in the archive. In the meantime, I am reaching out to people in Phil's circle for interviews. I've spoken to Phil's sister, Sunny Oakes, already, so keep your eye out for my interview with her, coming very, very soon. Now for some sentimental stuff. At the time of recording this, it's March 2021, and not to be a bummer, but 2020 was a rough year in many ways. In the summer, perhaps to cope, I found myself chin deep in an old hyperfixation of mine, Phil Oakes. Phil's been around my whole life, thanks to my dad playing his music for me from infancy. I always liked Phil, but I really got into him back in 2015. I was becoming more politically conscious and was struggling with my mental health, so Phil was who I turned to. I read his biographies, watched documentaries, became enamored with this man and his story, which has been all but hidden from the mainstream since his death. His albums started my vinyl collection, and I took a deep dive into his vast library of songs, so many for a career lasting little more than a decade. While on vacation in New York City, I retraced his steps in Greenwich Village with my uncle, after visiting one of his signature ivy caps on display in an exhibit called Folk City at the Museum of the City of New York. That's a mouthful. Over the years, my collection expanded from vinyl to any and all memorabilia I could get my hands on. Books, magazines, newspaper clippings, ads, etc. My home became its very own Phil Oakes archive. Then the interest lay dormant for a couple of years, until recently. I initially thought, oh no, not this again. My friends will never hear the end of it. And then I looked at Generation Z, and I saw Phil's spark in them, and I realized how much they could benefit from hearing his story. And then I thought, why subject just my friends to this fixation of mine? Why not the world? So I did what millennials are often compelled to do. I decided to start a podcast. This show is for all ages, but if you're my age or younger, it's for you especially. In the past 8 months, I've watched this beautiful little community blossom around Phil Oakes and his music, and it gives me such hope for future generations. You know who you are, and I love you all. I want to thank Zachary Stevenson for agreeing to lend his voice to Phil and others. He is a brilliant talent and a shoo-in for the lead in a Phil Oakes biopic, not to mention as kind as can be. Check out ZacharyStevenson.com for more of his work. That's ZacharyStevenson. To Sunny Oakes, you are a treasure. Thank you for being so warm and forthcoming with me, and thank you for all the work you've done to keep your brother's legacy alive. To Sally, Alice, Elizabeth, and Mackenzie, thank you guys so much for joining me in discussions. Your insight means so much. To my girlfriend and editor, Marie, I love you so much. Thank you for joining me on this crazy ambitious project, and for putting up with me through it all. And finally, to you, listening right now, thank you so much for listening so far. I really hope you like it. Okay, on with the show.
This is Eric Anderson up here again. So, I'm Phil, he's Don. It's an intro. I wanted to bring him up here to do one thing, which is very much out of character with this whole program. What's that? It's a song, since this is a songwriter's hoot, I'd like to do a song by the two most successful songwriters in the world, Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Okay. No relation. So I should have known better with a girl like
It's November 1st, 1964, And with his friend Eric Anderson on harmonica, Phil sings I Should Have Known Better by the Beatles at the first Broadside-sponsored hootenanny at the Village Gate nightclub. What's a hootenanny? Why is Phil playing the Beatles at a hootenanny? Keep listening. Phil Ochs had something to say, and I'm gonna say it now. This is God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Ochs. Part 2. I Ain't Marchin' Anymore. Okay, so you're probably wondering what I mean when I say hootenanny. Hootenanny is an old Appalachian word that was commonly used to refer to items like thingamajig or doodad. I'm sure you've heard it used as a fun word to call a party, kind of like shindig. In this case, a hootenanny, also called a hoot, is a party, with an open mic. Essentially a jam session for folk musicians. Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, and other members of the Almanac Singers popularized hootenannies in the Village after catching wind of the term in Washington state. By 1963, the folk movement had gained quite a bit of popularity, and in an attempt to cash in on this success, ABC debuted a television show titled, you guessed it, Hootenanny, that April. Curiously, ABC would not invite Pete Seeger to appear on the show. The folkies were furious at this, certain that Seeger had been blacklisted due to his left-wing politics. The producers claimed that Seeger simply wasn't popular enough to appear, but Pete was one of the central figures in the folk revival, second only to Guthrie, so the folkies found that excuse to be bullshit. Joan Baez, a prominent artist in the scene who was invited to appear, refused to perform if Seeger wasn't welcome on the show. The gauntlet had been thrown, and Judy Collins and Carolyn Hester organized an official boycott of ABC's Hootenanny, and soon many other artists followed suit, including Phil. Not everyone was on board with the boycott, Pete Seeger himself included. Pete, a gentle guy with the demeanor of Mr. Rogers, urged artists to continue to appear on the show in order to keep the public interested in folk music. Regardless, Phil, like many others in the community, stuck to his guns, even if that meant missing out on a big opportunity for his career. Ultimately, Hootenanny was taken off the air in September 1964. It ran for 43 episodes. So, it's November 1st, 1964, and Phil is playing the Beatles at a hootenanny. Remember that the Beatles had taken the U.S. by storm early that year with their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in February, hence someone letting out a Beatlemania scream in jest during Phil's performance.
That when I tell you that I love you, oh, you're gonna say you love me too, oh. And when I ask you to be mine, you're gonna say you love me too. So
But Phil wasn't performing in jest.
I only did that, for the main reason is that to make a point that it's all not nonsense. That I think, in all of music today, what's going on in folk music, I think the Beatles are the most exciting thing. Really, musically going on, and that's what I always like to make a point about writing topical songs, that I always try to do that when I'm writing songs. Like the first song I did, That's What I Want to Hear, is a very, pop-oriented melody, that's why we did it, to show you that pop-oriented songs aren't necessarily bad, and that's pretty exciting music.
Pretty exciting music, indeed. Phil obviously thought that if he married his lyrics with the infectious melodies of pop, that his message would catch on much more strongly with mainstream audiences. Phil didn't shy away from fame or commercial success, despite often canceling commercial gigs to perform benefits. In fact, Phil wanted desperately to be famous. But He wanted to be famous on his own terms, and those terms included using fame to fight for the causes he cared about, like the civil rights movement, strengthening labor unions, and ending the war in Vietnam. His music, like the music of most of those in the folk movement, was inseparable from his activism. When it came to his career, Phil was yet unsatisfied. His first album wasn't selling as well as he'd hoped. All the News That's Fit to Sing was enjoying only modest success, primarily in New York, and reviews were mixed. Some critics found him to be sloppy and wet behind the ears, while others appreciated his candor and sharp wit. Regardless, such an album wasn't exactly destined for the charts, especially in the midst of the British invasion. Still, Phil was frustrated. After all, he had Grossman. Albert Grossman was Bobby Dylan's manager, and Dylan's career had just taken off, with few signs of slowing. Dylan. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Phil Ochs fan without even a little bit of animosity for Bob Dylan. It's impossible to tell Phil's story without mentioning Dylan, especially during those early years in the Village. Another kid from the Midwest with a guitar, Bob Dylan arrived in Greenwich Village in 1961, over a year before Phil did.
I went to New York to become the best songwriter in the country, and then I met Dylan and decided I'd be second best.
One early morning at the Oakes household, Phil and fellow folk singer David Cohen, who would later become David Blue, are sitting in the living room after a long night of wine and song. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Bobby rushes in, carrying a napkin with something scrawled on it. He has a new song, but he insists that Phil and David each play something first. The men comply, and after Phil rattles off The Power and the Glory, Bob picks up the guitar, and out tumbles Mr. Tambourine Man. Phil Ochs, David Cohen, and Alice Ochs in the hallway. This was the first audience the song would see. Phil, with absolute certainty, tells Dylan it's going to be a hit. Phil's friendship with Bobby wasn't all about the music. Dylan shared with Phil a love for the movies, something Phil never grew out of. It wasn't unusual for Ochs, Cohen, Van Ronk, and Dylan to head to the Lyric for a Western double feature after a night of cards, filling their bellies with popcorn and living vicariously through the stars on screen. Dylan's newfound notoriety came with certain perks. One Saturday night when Phil and David Cohen were having some drinks at the Kettle of Fish, Dylan walked in and said to Phil,
"How'd you like to meet someone important?"
When Phil asked who it was, Bob said nothing, piling Phil and David into a cab and instructing the driver to take them to the Dakota. It wasn't until Dylan rang the doorbell to the apartment that Phil discovered who the someone important was. The door swung open to reveal Marlon Brando, a childhood hero of Phil's, someone whose leather-clad image adorned the wall at Phil's own apartment. The actor invited the three to sit with him on the floor and pass a joint around. Phil was starstruck. Dylan boldly proposed they all go down to the Gaslight with Brando in tow to blow everybody's mind. Brando politely declined. If you were to grab some random person on the street and ask them to name the first protest singer to come to mind, they're likely gonna name Bob Dylan. It's true that protest songs like Blowin' in the Wind helped put Dylan on the map, but at this point in his career he started to distance himself from the movement and focused inward, writing more personal songs. Folk purists weren't exactly pleased with this new direction, and at Newport 64 he received a lukewarm response for his performance, though it would be a breeze compared to the following year. We'll talk about that one later. Phil's performance, however, was pure lightning. His energy is high in the recordings, and excitement seems to replace the severe anxiety of the year prior.
Now the labor leaders screaming when they close a missile plant. United Fruit screams at the Cuban shore. Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
In the eyes of the folkies, a new king of protest music had been crowned. In response to his coronation and to criticism of Dylan, Phil stood by his friend. In Broadside 54, Phil wrote,
"It is as if the entire folk community was a huge biology class, and Bob was a rare prize frog." Erwin Silber wrote an open letter to Bob, telling him he couldn't really write about the world honestly without writing protest songs, and accused him of relating only to himself and his cronies. I agree, and I would like to add my name to the list of accusers. I hereby publicly smack Bob's hand and demand that he be made to stand in a dark corner, preferably at Newport, and forced to write "Forgive me, Joe Hill" at least 1,000 times. Who does Dylan think he is, anyway? When I grow used to an artist's style, I damn well expect him not to disappoint me by switching it radically. My time is too precious to waste trying to change a pattern of my thought. In the last issue of Broadside, Paul Wolfe handed me the topical crown, saying I had won it from Bob at Newport, and stating that the future of topical music rested on me. Then he went on to attack the former champion for his low level of new writing and his lack of consideration for the audience at Newport. Well, I'm flattered by the compliments, but I'd like to point out several misconceptions in the article. It didn't take any more nerve for me to go on the Newport stage and sing strong protest material, since strong protest songs are so accepted. In reality, I didn't show any more respect for the audience than Bob did, because we were really just doing exactly the same thing, that is, writing naturally about what was on our minds. As for Bob's writing, I believe it is as brilliant as ever and is clearly improving all the time.
Dylan, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as kind to Phil's writing.
"The stuff you're writing is bullshit, because politics is bullshit. It's all unreal. The only thing that's real is inside you, your feelings. Just take a look at the world you're writing about and you'll see you're wasting your time. The world is just absurd."
But Phil continued, at least for now, to write his topical songs. And if writing topical songs was talking the talk, Phil was walking the walk as well. Protests were a natural habitat for him. Even as far back as Ohio State, Phil was rallying against mandatory ROTC classes and protesting dorm constitutions. More recently, he spent Christmas of 1963 in Hazard, Kentucky, with his buddies Eric Anderson and Tom Paxton, singing for the Coal Miners Union. During this time, he wrote 2 songs, Hazard, Kentucky.
Well, the Depression was ended with the war, but nobody told Kentucky, that is sure. Some are living in a sewer while the jobs are getting fewer, but more coal is mined than ever was before. Well, mining is a hazard in Hazard, Kentucky, and if you ain't mining there, you're awful lucky, 'cause if you don't get silicosis or pay that's just atrocious, you'll be screaming for a union that will care.
And No Christmas in Kentucky.
Let's drink a toast to Congress and a toast to Santa Claus and a toast to all the speeches that bring the loud applause. There's not enough to give, no, there's just not enough to share. So we'll drown the sounds of sorrow with a hearty Christmas cheer. No, they don't have Christmas in Kentucky. There's no holly on a West Virginia door. For the trees don't twinkle when you're hungry, and the jingle bells don't jingle when you're poor.
This excursion was thanks to activist and organizer Arthur Gorson, who spent a lot of time at Greenwich Village haunts and who hit it off with Phil quickly after meeting him. Gorson admired Phil's passion and energy and knew he'd be an indispensable voice in the movement. Phil remained on the move for both tour dates and demonstrations, leaving Alice at home with the baby. When he was home, which was rare, he would often find himself staring down the lens of Alice's camera. See, Alice Oakes, in the meantime, discovered she had a real knack for photography. She built up her portfolio by snapping photos of the various folkies that perpetually hung around the apartment, baby Megan, and, of course, Phil. If you were to do a Google image search for Phil Oakes, I'd wager that a good 25 to 30% of those photos were shot by Alice. Phil perched atop an outdoor sculpture, adjusting his tie and grinning. Phil next to a dusty painting on the fire escape at their apartment, staring into the distance. Phil carrying Megan on his shoulders as he holds a black umbrella above their heads. Phil on the phone, smiling. Phil on the phone, frowning, presumably after spotting Alice with the camera. He detested candid shots. After all, you never saw James Dean or Marlon Brando laughing on the telephone. No, posed and brooding was how Phil preferred to be captured. By summer of 1964, another cause was calling Phil's name: the Mississippi Caravan of Music, a troupe of folk singers that played town after town, meeting with local activists at every stop to drum up voter registration. Legends like Pete Seeger and Gil Turner were joined by lesser-known artists like Eric Anderson and Phil, the latter two departing a day ahead of the rest. Phil brimmed with excitement on the drive down, until now having only witnessed the violence in the South like a movie on his television screen. Reality struck when almost as soon as they arrived, the bodies of civil rights workers Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were pulled from the swamps. This was when Phil realized activism had real stakes, and for the rest of the week he was certain someone would try to kill him on stage. This fear stuck with Phil for the remainder of his career, and friends and family were often planted in key areas of various venues, instructed to watch for assassins. Phil's fear and anger were only matched by curiosity. Acting as a journalist, he carried a notebook to record accounts of what was going on around him, peppering locals with question after question. The more he probed, the more upset he became, and he used his research to write a vitriolic indictment of the entire state entitled "Here's to the State of Mississippi."
And here's to the people of Mississippi, who say the folks up north, they just don't understand, and they tremble in the shadows at the thunder of the Klan. Oh, the sweating of their souls can't wash the blood from off their hands, or they smile and shrug their shoulders at the murder of a man. Whoa, here's to the land you've torn out the heart of. Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of.
The song was met with critics, namely Dave Van Ronk, who found Phil's singling out of Mississippi to be absurd. Vilifying the South, he thought, played into a liberal mentality that allowed one to ignore the more covert racial issues in the North. This did little to hold Phil back. As far as he was concerned, he was only writing what he felt, and he thought it essential that such raw, emotional honesty be recorded. Alice was alone in the apartment when the phone rang.
Oakes here.
Phil was calling to say he was thinking about divorce.
I'm a lousy father. I'm a bad husband. You deserve more than this.
Alice couldn't argue. She felt more like a secretary than a wife, having spent most of her time sitting by the phone in case someone important called for Phil. She had ambitions of her own, like turning her photography into a career. Phil was rarely home, and when he was, they fought. In spite of this, Phil was riddled with indecision, proposing they have another baby to try and make things work. Alice gently refused. By January 1965, Phil was staying at the Chelsea Hotel, leaving the Bleecker Street apartment to his wife and daughter while he looked for a place of his own, the what-ifs of the doomed relationship haunting him for the rest of his days. Phil and Alice Oakes would never divorce, perhaps to ensure that neither of them would make the mistake of matrimony again. Barely a month passed between the separation and the release of Phil's sophomore album. Unfortunately, there is little to no documentation of the recording process of this album, so as fans we can only speculate. Please join me and a small circle of friends as we discuss the songs of I Ain't Marching Anymore.
It's always the old to lead us to the war. It's always the young to fall. Now look at all we wanted to savor and to done. Tell me, is it worth it all?
Welcome to the second album discussion for God Help the Troubadour. This is I Ain't Marching Anymore. I am Tori. I am your host. I have a problem. I am obsessed with Phil Oakes, and this is what I do to help alleviate that. And I've got a small circle of friends here to discuss these albums with me because I don't want to sound like a know-it-all. So, you two introduce yourselves with pertinent information like your pronouns and things you like to do on the weekends. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, it feels like icebreakers, like on the first day of school.
Yeah, it is.
Did everyone do this summer?
What did you do this summer?
Alright, I'm Mackenzie. My pronouns are she, her. On the weekends, I like to sleep. Like, I like to sleep every day. Just sleep and not think about my problems.
Nice. Such a vibe.
Vibe.
Hey, I'm Elizabeth, just she, her pronouns, and I love to talk about Phil. I could talk about him forever, so this podcast is a very good outlet for that.
Round table, where does this album rank for you guys?
Personally, it's kind of towards the bottom for me. I lean more towards the A&M albums anyway. The topical stuff just kind of falls to the bottom for me. But this one definitely, out of like the first 3 albums, just doesn't pack the same punch as All the News and In Concert. It just feels kind of like each song is really powerful lyrically, I think, and very poignant. But I think the energy just is not what it was on All the News. It's not as like barreling.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I kind of personally consider it to be the weakest out of the Elektra records.
I wouldn't say it's one of my personal favorites, but I still think it's a really good album. Like, you can tell that he's becoming a lot more comfortable in his like songwriting abilities, and he's like saying like really like powerful things. Like, he's getting his message across like in a very clear manner, I think.
It feels like he was maybe a little bit censored on this album, and that maybe that's why the energy is not what it was on All the News, because All the News are these very, like, this collection of very, very purposed songs, very driven songs about very specific incidents. I think that's maybe what brings the album down for me a little bit, is that it just isn't as explicit as All the News is.
It kind of shines through in his liner notes where he just kind of seems unsure of himself a little bit. And it just also seems really low-key and dialed back. There's not a lot of energy sonically on it. The first one, there's like definitely like this naive kid sound, like he's just like excited to get this message out, and the second one is just like, they told me to be more broad, where like one of the strongest songs on the album is Here's to the State of Mississippi, and it's like, I feel like that one really does have the spirit of All the News that's fit to sing. It's just like, leading into that, what songs stand out for you guys on this album, and like, why do you think they stand out?
I think personally for me, maybe the one that stands out most in the album is Draft Dodger Red, just because I think it has such an like amazing use of humor. I think it like showcases like Phil's like talent as a songwriter. Like, he's not just strictly like writing these like somber like topical songs, but he can like use like satire and humor to still get his message across.
I think it's a really good example of his sense of humor, and again, that's another thing that's just kind of lacking on this album. The first one has a more lighthearted feel, contrasting a lot of the more serious things. We're just gonna dunk on I Ain't Marching Anymore.
I feel
I
bad.
Ain't Marching Anymore just isn't All the News.
I feel so bad.
I think for me, Links on the Chain is probably my standout song.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, obviously, like, the Newport 64 performance of this is like unreal. It is lightning, like captured in a 3-minute song. But I just think that's a really, really strong song and shows his understanding of politics, of like American politics, and of
Yeah.
how it really affects working class people. And I think Links on the Chain is more in line with that kind of stuff that I like from All the News. That is that very powerful, energetic young Phil that is like, I'm coming to get you. Like, injustice,
Yeah.
I'm coming for you. Like, you have a target on your back.
So we'll start with the title track, I Ain't Marching Anymore.
For I stole California from the Mexican land, fought in the bloody Civil War. Yes, I even killed my brothers and so many others, but I ain't marching anymore. For I marched to the battles of the German trench in a war that was bound to end all wars. Oh, I must have killed 1 million men and now they want me back again, but I ain't marching anymore. It's always the old to lead us to the...
How do we feel about I Ain't Marching Anymore?
Awful song. No, obviously, like, that's like a quintessential, like, when you think Phil Oakes, you think, like, Changes, I Ain't Marching Anymore. And it is a lot of fun. It's, once again, I love when he uses specifics. I love when he's like, this date and time is when this happened, and I'm gonna, like, I want to right this wrong.
It's definitely, like, seen as his signature
Yeah.
song. Like, anytime he's mentioned in a documentary or anything, and I'm guilty of it too, it's... Well, the riff is just so much fun, and it's recognizable, and it's catchy, and it's not, like, dated. It's a vibe, and it just makes it hard to talk about because you've heard it so many times, and you just... It makes it really hard to, like, actually look into the lyrics, and I struggled with that. And it's, like, it's him. Like, it is him. It's, his spirit. But it's honestly not one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, it's one of the songs I listen to the most, which for me, usually I do steer away from. Like, I don't listen to Changes all that often. I don't listen to War Is Over all that often. Like, I don't listen to, like, the big songs. But this song I always find myself coming back to.
Yeah.
I think, like, one of my favorite moments in the song, but when he goes into For I Flew the Final Mission in the Japanese Sky, that moment in the song, for some reason, like, gets me really hyped. The more it ramps up as the timeline moves closer to, like, modern day, you know, so For I Flew the Final Mission in the Japanese Sky, it just gets more and more powerful and more impactful. And then ending...
Yeah, it's more real.
Yeah, exactly. And then ending with, you know, now the labor leaders screaming when they close the missile plants. Like, it's just, I mean, it's a really well-written song. Like, when you talk about...
Yeah, exactly.
The ability to write a good song, like, the composition of music, it is, like, textbook perfect, really, honestly. And so for me, it's just it's a very fun song to listen to, and it's easy to listen to. And I think it's a very good song to be like, hey, have you ever heard of Phil Oakes?
Right.
Ever heard of the Vietnam War? Ever heard of every war that we've ever been involved in as a country? Check this song out. It's a great shoe in the door.
I think the title track is personally one of my favorite Phil songs. Like Mackenzie said, I think it's a very fun song. Also, like, being, like, a history nerd, like, I love that it's almost like a little history lesson. Like, he goes through this timeline of events, and I personally really like that. And also, I think it's in the same vein as, like, Universal Soldier. He's, like, trying to embody, like, a soldier.
Right.
Like, and this person has, like, gone through, like, all of these events, you know, like the metaphorical soldier, I think.
I'll read his notes on it. So it says, this borders between pacifism and treason, combining the best qualities of both. The fact that you won't be hearing this song over the radio is more than enough justification for the writing of it.
Yeah.
Go off.
You could say that about every single Phil Oakes song. The lyrics that stand out for me on that one, I must have killed 1 million men and now they want me back again.
Oh, yeah.
The bridge I really like. It's always the old to lead us to the wars, always the young to fall.
Yeah.
Very true.
Very good, yeah.
Always the rich to lead us to the wars, always the poor to fall. And especially Call It Peace or Call It Treason, Call It Love or Call It Reason, those really stand out for me. I do like this song, it's not up there for me.
Yeah.
And on this album, it's definitely like one of the punchiest songs.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just another one of those songs that he even said that, I don't know what show it is. I think it's maybe the bootleg from like 1973 that just came out recently. Where he says like,
Lansing?
I'm used to playing this song outdoors. Yeah, maybe it's in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I think.
Or no, Michigan. Lansing, Michigan.
Same thing. Just kidding. But he's like, yeah, I'm used to playing this one outdoors, you know? And I think that kind of makes the song just a lot more fun. It's another one of those songs that I like to listen to live. I prefer listening to the live versions of it just because it is, you get that energy, and hearing like everybody yelling and in consensus with what he's saying packs more of a punch than just listening to it on the album.
Half the time when there's footage of him, it's him playing I Ain't Marching Anymore outside. In the Heat of the Summer.
In the heat of the summer, when the pavements were burning, soul of a city was ravaged in the night, after the city sun was sinking. Now no one knows how it started, why the windows were shattered, but deep in the dark someone set the spark, and then it no longer mattered.
Ooh, yes. I think that's like a question that asks about like anything relevant to today. That's definitely the one I put down.
Same here.
Absolutely.
I don't go to this song much, just because it's, like I said, I feel those really punchy, energetic songs on the Elektra albums personally. I do love Odetta's cover of the song though. I think that
yeah, exactly. It's almost like a song that Phil wasn't meant to sing, and that's not something I say lightly.
I think that's a very cool thing about him though, is that I think he probably knew that there were a lot of songs that he wrote that he was like, these are not meant. I think every song he wrote, especially the first 3 albums and the topical stuff after, is like, these songs are not for me. Like, they are for you all to do with whatever you would like, you know?
It's more like he's acting as a messenger with these albums.
Most definitely, yeah.
I mean, his empathy shines through a lot in the heat of the summer. I wrote empathy for everyone in parentheses except cops.
Except cops, yes. Yeah, I put this for moments of the album that are kind of impactful for me. The last verse, when the fury was over, the shame was replacing the anger. So wrong, but we've been down so long and we had to make somebody listen. I mean, damn. Yeah, that's really powerful. And the fact that it's written almost 60 years ago is even more painful. It's the fact that I'm looking at this and thinking, wow, we just had this summer. This was the summer of 2020 for us, you know? And this is getting into the, you know, what songs are relevant for us now, but we literally just lived through the summer that he wrote about in the early 60s, and that's very hard to listen to and look at. So I think that's what maybe another reason it's one of the songs I don't listen to as much, just because it is very raw.
And
line you know, for shame wrote the papers, why the hurry to your hunger, now the rebels resting on your broken streets, so you see what your rage has unraveled. That is I mean, that's like that, like you said, that's what we're seeing on the news. That's what the media is saying to people who have been targeted for the entire existence of their people and our nation, and then gaslighting them into thinking it's their fault.
Exactly.
The situation we're in, and he was just right on the nose with it. Right, I mean, more so than I think any other writer at the time was.
And the tone of it is more sad and less scary. Like when you think of a riot, you think of just chaos and violence and fear, and this is just like, this is so fucking sad that this is still happening, and it doesn't paint a riot as an evil thing.
Yeah, it's very progressive for the time.
It is, yeah.
I think
It-
it really, rather than like embodying rage, it
Mhm.
embodies like defeat. And that's ultimately, I mean, I think that rioting and looting as a response to social injustice is equal parts rage and defeat. Wrong, so
Yeah.
wrong, but we've been down so long and we had to make somebody listen. You know, like, we're still doing this? Wow.
I think In the Heat of the Summer has some of Phil's strongest lyrics personally, like just the overall message and just like still applying it to today, and like the restlessness that existed back then that's still here now. And I think also like, but on a deeper level, I think about like the heat and summer and how like the heat makes people like really agitated, kind of like restless, like I said. And I think that's something that like still really echoes today. Like I feel like these things happen in summer, like because it's like building up slowly, and then when the heat sets in, people get agitated and kind of like tired, and I don't know how to describe it. Hopefully
like
you
a
guys like
boiling
catch
point.
my train of thought here. Yeah,
it's like,
and it's like these things keep happening in summer, like, and I don't think that's just a coincidence.
I think that's a common trope in art, like in media, in music and television and film, that when it gets hot, people are worked into a frenzy. It's just that frustration. It's that it really is a parallel between the earth and us. I would like to point out, we talk about this a lot. This is a big thing we talk about, but this is a very early instance of Phil's alliteration that is just on point and very, very, I mean, so effective in this song. It's very, very effective. You know, where were the white silver tongues? No, 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 moaned the mayor. Now the rubble's resting in your broken heart. See what your rage has unraveled. Just that it sticks on it really just stays on your tongue after you say it.
Let me read his notes on it. Scenes and images of the riots last summer in Harlem. As is usually the case, the loudest bursts of outrage came from those most responsible for the debacle. Wow.
Wow. It's cool that he did not have much to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Draft Dodger Rag, teehee.
Oh, I'm just a typical American boy from a typical American town. I believe in God and Senator Dodd, and I keep an old Castro down. And when it came my time to serve, I knew better dead than red. But when I got to my old draft board, buddy, this is what I said. Sarge, I'm only 18, I got a ruptured spleen, and I always carry a purse. I've got eyes like a bat and my feet are flat, and my asthma's getting worse. Yes, think of my career, my sweetheart dear, my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm a-going to school and I'm a-working in a defense plant.
That honestly is just the vibe of the song. Like,
I mean, the Smothers Brothers covered it, so it was another Pete liked to cover that one. Pete Seeger.
Definitely a crowd.
I like how we're on a first name basis with Pete Seeger.
Yeah, covered it, you know.
It's another one that's very heavily associated with Phil. Like it's like when you think of Phil, it's like I Ain't Marching Anymore, Draft Dodger Rag, Love Me I'm a Liberal, whatever. And I think at the time it was written, draft dodging at the time, or the draft just wasn't quite as serious yet.
Yeah.
It was all just kind of a joke, but apparently this is like a popular song for people in the military to sing like together.
Yeah, it was like I've seen that a lot on the Phil Oaks Facebook group that I think we're all in. A lot of older people that are a part of it talk about, like we would sing this like during our drills. But I mean, this is obviously just a very tongue-in-cheek song.
Yeah.
But can we talk about
very
Phil's
cute.
draft dodging? I think this is a very good time to bring it up. I love the fact that he would write letters to the draft board and be like, I have a child on the way. I have a wife.
I don't feel well right now. I'm on the road.
Yeah, I'm on the road. I'm sick. Like, that's fantastic. It's tongue in cheek, but it's very real for him because he probably was like, he was pulling things out his ass to try to not go.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, don't blame him.
Wait, was Elvis drafted?
Yes. I wonder what he thought about that.
I wonder too. Yeah.
That's something that's very interesting that we have not spoken about, I don't think. That
no.
He was like, I'm gonna keep quiet on that. I'm gonna pretend that I didn't see him do that. How did we get here? Draft Dodger Rag.
Draft Dodger Rag.
Draft
It's
Dodger
okay.
Rag.
It's not a deep song. It's fun. It makes me laugh almost every time. Especially like certain performances of it, like
Yeah.
Newport. We can go on
Oh,
about
yeah.
Newport 64. I just love how he goes.
My asthma's getting worse.
You can
Really
tell
just-
he's feeling so hyped from like when he said keeping old Castor down, and the crowd like responded to that. You could tell he was like feeling the hype and like getting to it.
I love the way he would feed off crowds. And his version, like at Newport, he's like yelling it.
Mhm.
It's so good.
He's yelling
So
everything
great.
at Newport.
I'm going to circle back to Draft Dodger Rag because I forgot to read his liner notes on it. It says, in Vietnam, a 19-year-old Viet Cong soldier screams that Americans should leave his country as he is shot by a government firing squad. His American counterpart, meanwhile, is staying up nights thinking of ways to deceptively destroy his health, mind, or virility to escape 2 years in a relatively comfortable army. Free enterprise strikes again.
He's self-aware. I mean, he hardly ever does border on the average American, but when he does, he is self-aware.
That really is just a stark contrast from the song. I mean, before that, he says it's a relatively comfortable army, but a couple of years later, it was not.
I think he could see that. He knew the weight of his own, desires to stay away from his local draft board.
Oh, you tell me that your last good dollar is gone, and you say that your pockets are bare. And you tell me that your clothes are tattered and torn, and nobody seems to care. Now don't tell me your troubles, no, I don't have the time to spare. But if you want to get together and fight, good buddy, that's what I want to hear.
That's what I want to hear. I really like That's What I Want to Hear.
I love That's What I Want to Hear. That was maybe I think that Love Me, I'm a Liberal was definitely the first song I heard. I Ain't Marching Anymore was number 2. And That's What I Want to Hear was number 3. I don't know how. I think that's just kind of what I grabbed from. And That's What I Want to Hear is just, that's a fun song. It is very fun, and it makes me go, you know what? Yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a call to unionize. It's interesting now, if he was just a young songwriter trying to write songs about unionizing, but was also trying to go wait tables, he would probably lose his job. I mean, even then, unions were obviously becoming, we're kind of getting blacklisted, but now especially. And so I think that this song is really cool now because it is very concealed in its purpose. It's not overtly, like Links on the Chain is very pro-union, very overtly. But this is not very overtly pro-union. And so I think it's kind of a cool, kind of has a double purpose. Because it can be used generally. Like, hey, things are bad right now, socially, politically. But there are others who feel the same way that you do. So hey, let's pick up whatever we can and go fight the good fight. But it's also, its purpose is unionizing. But I really like the discretion used because it's appropriate. It's very appropriate now because now you can't as overtly, I'm nervous to even say I'm pro-union now because what if my future employer finds out that I was a part of a podcast and listens to this episode and fires me because I'm unionize,
They find out you're a part of a Phil Oakes podcast and it's just all right, bye.
No, they say, who's Phil Oakes? And then I go, oh shit. No, nobody. You don't even know who Phil Oakes. Please don't fire me.
I always thought of the song as a call to action, almost trying to rally people up. There's all these things going on, but you're not experiencing this alone.
Yeah, and it's always fun to hear Phil be optimistic.
That was the president.
I love Phil with all my heart, but I don't give a shit about JFK.
Oh.
You're gonna make Beth sad.
No.
It's not only for the leader that the sorrow hits so hard. There are greater things I'll never understand. How a man so filled with life, even death was caught off guard. That was the president, and that was the man.
Phil certainly wasn't as militant as like Dave Van Ronk, especially since he like idolized JFK. Again, this song in particular, it's not really one of my favorites, but it's still got some like banger lyrics, and at the same time, it's like I wrote Phil had a big heart, and that's really true. The left and Phil had hope for JFK to move left, but he was robbed of that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. This is a very good display of how big his heart was. And just definitely like his sensitivity and his sort of penchant for romance. Just like his love for Elvis. I think his love for Elvis is very similar to his love for JFK. And just that the romance and the glory of who JFK was as a man and what he represented to the nation. And that just really speaks to him as a person. So even though I personally do not like JFK all that much, it is moving. So I can't imagine for folks who love JFK and who treasured him. Like if this song would have been released like as a single or something, I feel like it probably would have done really, really well and probably would have gotten him a lot of attention. Because this is a song that I think most Americans could have gotten behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought about that. Beth, you like JFK, you like the Kennedys in general, right?
Yeah, I know I'm guilty of romanticizing JFK. I think a lot of people can fall into that same sort of sentiment.
No, it's fine.
I think like the song like just means so much because like his assassination was such a turning point for the country. I think it kind of forced people to grow up, I think, in a sense. I think Phil's generation was one that was very optimistic, like we're gonna change the world, and the assassination I think was such a blow to that sort of mindset and forced people to see like, okay, things aren't as beautifully colored as we might think. That that's a better word than what I'm thinking. But
I know he's not as progressive as Bernie Sanders, but it's like, imagine if Bernie Sanders was elected president and was assassinated. I feel like it would feel similar.
Yeah, I think, Beth, you said something really, really cool, like, that this is kind of, like, this generation growing up. Like, the death of Kennedy is, like, this generation growing up. Honestly, you could switch out the words, like, that was the president, with, like, that was our optimism. Like, I think, a good chunk of the optimism of the left was severed. So I think that was a really good point of like the left going, oh God, like this movement is not as romantic as we thought. Like my family has told stories. My grandmother, my dad's mother was from Spain. She grew up in Spain and moved here, got married to my grandfather was in the military and he was stationed in Spain. They met and moved here. And so she grew up in Spain, grew up in a whole different country, barely spoke English, did not necessarily love living in America. But when she was sitting in the hospital the day after my dad was born with him, saw that JFK had been shot, she was devastated. And that just kind of speaks to not necessarily JFK's politics, but more of just him as a figure, as a very romantic figure. And so I think that we can equate that. Like Phil had the same love for him as a leftist that my Spanish grandmother, who knew nothing about American politics, had for him. Just as two people who loved the romance of who he was.
That gives me a perfect segue into his liner notes, because he said, "My Marxist friends can't understand why I wrote this song, and that's probably one of the reasons why I'm not a Marxist. After the assassination, Fidel Castro aptly pointed out that only fools could rejoice at such a tragedy. For systems, not men, are the enemy."
Yeah. That can be used in so many different contexts, though. Like, man, I love the use of that quote.
Moving on, Iron Lady.
Have you seen the Iron Lady's charms? Legs of steel, leather on her arm, taking on a man to die, life for a life, eye for an eye, and that's the Iron Lady in the chair.
I don't want to talk about
Or
this.
you don't want to talk about Iron
This
Lady.
is honestly one of my least favorite Phil Oak songs.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's not
that's
a
what it's
favorite
about.
of mine. The song itself doesn't do much for me. But there's some interesting things about it. But if you're familiar with Eileen Wuornos, who is one of America's most notorious serial killers, was a female serial killer, was a sex worker who killed Johns, and a lot of people really sympathize with her. Her attorney played it for her after she was sentenced. Played it for her on the guitar with the songbook right there. That gives it a little bit more weight for me, but again, it's not a song that I personally gravitate toward. But you know, he was super firm on his stance on the death penalty, which I really like. He was very much into reform. Again, it's another great example of his empathy. You find that in so many of his songs, of course, because he's Phil. But lines that stood out for me were the state's allowed to murder in the chair, and a rich man's never died upon the chair. Like how the death penalty often affects poorer people or people of color.
Yeah, I think it's just hard, especially like politically, to get excited about this song, because even though I agree with the stance, and I have to applaud him for being so progressive, just because this was not a very popular stance at the time, and still necessarily isn't. I mean, a lot of Americans
No.
still support the death penalty. So of course
Even, I wouldn't say leftist, but like liberals I see supporting the death penalty, or like more centrist things. So it's something that not a lot of people will get on board with.
I feel bad. I just don't have much to say about this album in general. And I feel bad. Like, I feel bad. Like,
It's totally okay.
Phil's asked to ever say anything unbiased about him. I'll love anything that he does, you know? It's
Yeah.
like this album just doesn't hit that spot for me the way,
It
like,
really doesn't.
like Pleasures of the Harbor would. I
Yeah.
think, like, a lot of the same sentiments that were said earlier, like, this album is just too general, it's too vague, I think.
I think that he felt the same way. Like, okay, this album is not what I would like it to be. These songs are not, because even whenever he came back with In Concert, it is much more specific. It is much more driven and purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's ironic because it's the main thing that Phil gets so much criticism for, is like, your songs are too specific, and they're like, they have an expiration date, like these very topical songs, and then it's like when he writes songs as if they're a newspaper article, or like as a journalist, people are like, it's not relevant anymore. But like, I would honestly say that these more specific songs, at least within these first two albums, because I don't think he quite honed that more broad style of writing until In Concert. It was almost like he had to channel that same anger, that same passion from these individual news stories into these more broad subjects.
The thing is, the songs that do have a shelf life, technically, with him, according to a lot of critics of his music, the most memorable songs are the songs that we know him by. Not we, because we know him by everything, but the songs that he is known by, the recognizable tunes, are the ones that are very time specific. Like when you read articles about him, William Worthy is always brought up. William Worthy is one that it was not necessarily like a super popular one, especially among us, but is one that's always brought up because it's great political satire. I Ain't Marching Anymore is very time specific. Draft Dodger Rag, we can't sing that now and it be culturally relevant. And I think I brought this up in the last discussion, that those songs do serve a purpose as lessons, I think. They're great history lessons, like you said, Beth. But I think that's a very, very interesting thing, that the songs on this album, he was told, hey, like, let's get a little less specific. Let's get a little bit broader. And then these songs are some of the least memorable songs that he wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's also worth noting that, like, his growing dislike of Elektra, I think, kind of like affected like this album in some way. I'm not sure like specifically, like I can't pinpoint it exactly, but I think growing realization that he needs to like move to another label kind of
Yeah.
affected this album,
Yeah.
because you can tell he's like unhappy with being with Elektra.
So The Highwayman.
The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, and the road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. And the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. Yes, the highwayman came riding up to the old inn door.
Again, that's not his words. This is a good time to kind of talk about his musical ability and his relationship with melody. I think personally, out of the first two albums and out of these poems set to song that he did, which I honestly wish he did more, The Highwayman just knocks the bells out of the park. I love the bells, but The Highwayman is just so haunting and beautiful, and I think his guitar playing on The Highwayman is fantastic. I like his use of his dynamics in his voice, the emotion in his voice and guitar, at the point where they're like, were they deaf, where it says, were they deaf that they did not hear. He quiets down on Bess the landlord's daughter. He had such a gift for melody.
This is another, like the bells, this is just him being like, yes, I'm a wonderful lyricist, I'm a wonderful journalist, hybrid songwriter, but I'm also an incredible musician. And let me just throw that in here. Let me just slap that in the middle of this album of topical music.
It's so great how you can see the influence of the words in these poems in his own lyrics. I mean, like with all the alliteration in Poe's work and this the imagery in The Highwayman.
I really like that television show that he made an appearance on where he sang this and sang Changes, the poetry show.
Yeah.
When he talks about like hearing The Highwayman for the first time in school, he acts very nonchalant about it and kind of like, oh, I don't remember. It was, at some point in my life. And acts very aloof towards poetry. And I think that's just, I think maybe that's just him, but I think that, like you said, you can see what an influence it has on him. It's so obvious that it's not just a poem to him. This is obviously it's a huge influence in how he creates imagery and fuses it with politics.
Yes.
But I love that interview. Anybody who's listening that hasn't seen that, check it out because it's fantastic.
Okay, it's just called Phil Oakes Highwayman /interview/changes. It was on the show Come Read to Me a Poem, and it was filmed on April 12th, 1967 in New York City. What sticks with me from that interview is where he says poetry should float.
Yeah.
You can tell how shy and like insecure he is.
Yes.
I just love it because he's speaking very quietly, but you can tell, I think, in that interview he looks a lot more comfortable with the interviewer than in like other ones.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the interviewer actually knows like what she's talking about.
Links on the chain. This song slaps.
And the man who tries to tell you that they'll take your job away, he's the same man who was scabbing hard just the other day. And your union's not a union till he's thrown out of the way. And he's choking on your leg of the chain, and he's choking on your leg of the chain.
This song slaps so hard, and that's 2020 slang for y'all.
For the boomers out there.
For all the boomers out there, we love ya. We're taking over the Phil Oakes fandom, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I named this as one of my standout songs, but like I really just can't stress enough. And I think this is another instance of, like we talked about with I Ain't Marching Anymore, kind of being a little history lesson. Because it is. I mean, it kind of takes you through the history of unions and how, since the creation of unions, there's always been capitalism trying to keep unions down. And I think we're seeing that now more than ever. I mean, unions
Capitalism and using the white working class, how often the white working class is bigoted. Like, there will be, like, white working class dudes, like blue-collar guys in unions who are racist or homophobic. And, like...
And that compromises the integrity of...
Yeah, exactly.
Historically compromise the integrity of the union, because that's not what it was meant to do. It wasn't made for those folks.
He's saying that, like, all that helps. That doesn't help you. That only hurts you. That only helps your boss. And,
exactly, yeah.
Again, Newport.
Let's just throw that out there to anybody listening. Listen to the Newport performance of this now. Like, stop this.
Yes.
Go listen to that and then come back to this, because it is unreal. It is compelling stuff. It is incredibly compelling.
It super is. This is one of Marie's favorites because she's like, I love when he just goes hard on the guitar, and he definitely goes hard on the guitar on this song, especially in Newport. And again, he's yelling. And it's so good. My favorite verse is and then there came the boycotts, and then the freedom rides. Like, that one, woo!
The Newport version is definitely my favorite performance of the song, and I think in this song, too, you can really hear the influence, like Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Joe Hill, and, like, their pro-union sentiment. And I think this song kind of, like, embodies, like, their influence on Phil.
Apparently, this was the song he played for Woody Guthrie when he visited him in the hospital shortly before he died. And according to Phil, Guthrie croaked out, "Good." And, I mean, if there's any Phil Oakes song that Guthrie would croak out "good" at, it's probably Links on the Chain. But yeah, the idea of, like, identity politics is really prevalent in this, and how you need to, like, have class solidarity. I know I'm not talking about how, like, identity politics aren't important. I'm not trying to say that. But it's more just him calling out bigotry within the unions and how that helps nobody.
It is, like, some of his best topical material. Like, if we're talking about just straight up reporting, interpreting politics into music, I think this is, like, top 3 songs for me.
Yeah. And speaking of Newport, Phil used this Newport performance to speak out for gay people in 1964.
Yeah.
He said,
Back in 1949, they purged out all the communists and socialists and homosexuals out of the labor unions, leaving behind virile American types.
The song specifically mentions the civil rights movement and black people, and how we need to have solidarity. Like, you white dudes, like, you need to shape up. We're all united in this one plight. And it's like, it's appealing to their empathy as well. It's like, when they block your trucks, boys, by laying on the road, all that they are doing is all that you have showed, that you've got to strike, you've got to fight to get what you are owed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very good, very progressive song. Like, there are so many union songs around this time from folks like him. But this just takes it to a level that I don't think any other union man had gone to yet. Like, even Woody, like, we love Woody. We fucking love Woody.
Yeah.
We love Pete. But this really takes it, like, the inclusivity of it and the progressiveness of it just takes it to a different level that nobody else was saying what he was saying.
Well, yeah, no one else on the left was criticizing unions or criticizing people in unions. which is what he chose to do with this, which is just bold. It's a really bold move on his part.
He really did never directly aligned with any political ideology, I don't think, because he really
No.
everything that he said was what he thought was right, no matter what he had
Yeah.
identified with. Whatever the consequences are from the left or from the right or from people buying my records, I'm gonna say it. And I
I'm
think
gonna
that we
say it
all
now.
I'm gonna say it now.
Hills of
From the
West
flat
Virginia.
plains of Ohio, we drifted out one day for the southern part of a journey. Underneath the bridge, the Ohio River sang as we headed for the hills of West Virginia. And the red sun of the morning was smiling through the trees as the darkness of the night was quickly fading, and the fog hugged the road like a cloudy, cloudy sea when we drove through the hills of West Virginia.
Obviously, it's not a super strong song, it's not a standout song, but for me, I find it really this song makes me cry. But
Aw.
I went to school at App State, which is in the Appalachian Mountains, and he wrote this. If I believe he was with Eric Anderson, right?
Yes, he was.
Driving from Kentucky, and wrote this as Eric Anderson drove through
Mhm.
the Appalachian Mountains. And so for me, like having spent a lot of time there, just the beauty um, that he's writing about is very real to me. And also a lot of the people like that he is writing about in these songs, especially the Union songs, a lot of those
Mhm.
people live in that area. The miners,
Exactly,
the,
yeah.
the people that has spoken out for in his first two albums. There's a high concentration of those people in West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountains is one of the most impoverished areas of the country
Mhm.
historically through our entire existence as a nation. Those folks have always been exploited for their labor, and their land has been exploited. So I think even though it's just a beautiful song about nature, kind of, and about the beauty of our country, it still
Mhm.
has this political subtext. And I don't know if he realized it. I don't know if that was purposeful. I don't know if that was on his mind as he wrote it, that this is the land of the oppressed, but it definitely has that for me. It's a beautiful anthem for a beautiful part of the country and a beautiful sector of people.
I'm gonna go into his liner notes because he does say something about the politics of it, and in that it's not intentionally political. But it's such a part of him that it's gonna leak into everything. He said, on one of my trips to Hazard, Kentucky, I drove through West Virginia with Eric Anderson, and I found myself renewing an old habit of pretending I was taking pictures with my mind. When the trip was over, I set down these images, which really don't have any special message. So it was like he was admittedly not trying to say anything besides write about his trip, and it's a good example of his imagery, how he really puts you there, and that's very admirable. I don't know. It's something that doesn't get a lot of attention by most people who talk about his music. They tend to lean toward the topical stuff. I wrote that I love his friendship with Eric Anderson.
It's even more fun reading the liner notes to this and knowing that this was written when he was during that trip to Kentucky. Because if you read "Death of a Rebel," they talk about him going to Kentucky with Eric Anderson and how he was a horrible driver, very
Yeah.
anxious, and would like swerve in between lanes and didn't like just was not a good driver. And so Eric Anderson had to drive. So I like to think of it as like Phil was driving and Eric was like, "Get out of the fucking way. Let me drive." And he was like, "Well, what
He
am I
had
gonna
to
do
do something to
now?"
occupy his.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a precious song. It is a very precious song. I don't listen to it much,
Yeah.
But it's close to my heart.
I remember reading the liner notes for this, and I'm gonna say it now, and I just absolutely loved it. Like, I think the fact that he, like, pretended to, like, take pictures with his mind, I think is, like, one of the cutest things, like, I've heard about him, and, like, I also, like,
Yeah.
occasionally do the same thing. I think that's,
Yeah.
I think everybody does it, like, when you're looking out the window, like, pretending you're in a movie, you know what I mean? I think that's what Phil
Yeah.
was doing, like, in this song.
Moving on.
Let's drink a toast to the Admiral, and here's to the Captain bold, and glory more for the Commodore when the deeds of might are told. They stand to the deck through the battle's wreck when the great shells roar and pound, and never they fear when the foe is near to lay their orders down. But off with your hats and 3 times 3 for every sailor's son, for the men below who fight the foe, the men behind the guns, oh, the men behind the guns.
To Men Behind the Guns, and I'm gonna start off by saying I'm an idiot, and I didn't know that he didn't write this song. I had no idea that he didn't write this song.
But it's like
No, it was written by John Rooney.
no. It was a poem by John Rooney. And I read the poem, and it's like more so than the Highwaymen, more so than the Bells. It is incredibly adapted for song. It is
Okay.
not even close. He took a lot of artistic liberties.
Well, thank goodness you did your homework, because I didn't do mine and I didn't even bother reading the poem.
Curious, because I remember reading that he didn't write it, and I was just like, oh. And then I eventually came across it, and then I was like, oh my god, that's the Men Behind the Guns. So then I
Mm-hmm.
looked at the lyrics and was like, okay, it's not copy and paste the lyrics as like,
Right.
even though the Highwaymen and the Bells, like there are a few differences, like he does adjust some things here and there for
Yeah.
the music. In this, it is much he took a lot of liberty with omitting certain lines and kind of changing things around, like changing like the meter of it and
Right.
everything. Honestly, y'all, I'm not gonna lie, the poem is boring. It was written in like the 1500s. This song is
In
just kind of inconsequential. It does absolutely nothing for me. I forget that it exists most of the time. Um,
I have
sorry, Bill.
lately. No, don't be sorry. He's fine.
He's fine.
So lately I have been gaining more appreciation for this song. Like I've been into it lately, especially the first verse.
It's a song that I
But
start and I think like, oh, I want to listen to Men Behind the Guns, and I start it, and at
Mhm.
first I'm like, great, this is fun, and then I'm like, I don't want to listen to this whole thing. I
Yeah.
thought I wanted to listen to this whole
Right.
thing, but now I'm kind of bored. You know?
I think that's a common feeling that I have with a lot of songs on this album in general. With God, we're just dunking on it. But yeah, I'm digging it more lately. Like this song in particular, it's like it shines a little bit more than the others. And I like the message of it. It's like where lower ranking soldiers have the most at stake and they're treated like fodder, and it's like all these highly decorated like generals and higher ranking military men are just like fully like decorated in all these like medals and things, and like they outshine the common sailor boys, the men who serve the guns. The people who are doing the work aren't given the appreciation or the credit that they arguably deserve. So that's what I drew from the meaning of this song and the sentiment, and I do dig that. Beth, how do you feel? Does this song make you feel things in your heart?
This one doesn't stand out to
I
me,
was
but I
gonna
like
say
it.
that every time.
I think it shows like, his sheer like musical ability to transform something so much. Like when I first listened to this, like I had no idea he didn't write it. Like I had no idea it was like derived from something else. And I
Yeah,
think the fact
I
that
had
like
no idea either. It's kind of the equivalent, I think, of like sampling a song now.
Okay.
Is kind
Yeah.
of what he did with it. Like if you read the poem, I'm looking at the poem right now, and it's definitely not the message is not the same as the message of the song. So I think that it's more of a parody, perhaps. It's taking the song and putting an ironic twist on it, I think it's
Mhm.
definitely a spoof of the song.
Wow.
Damn, Phil.
Weird Al.
Weird Al who?
Alrighty. Um, talking Birmingham Jam.
Walking down to Birmingham, way down south in Dixieland. Well, I thought that I would stop a while, take a vacation, southern style. Got some southern hospitality down there in a southern hospital. Oh, all the signs said welcome in, signed by Governor Wallace and Rin Tin Tin. They said come along and watch the fights while we feed our dogs on civil rights. Now, don't get us wrong, some of our best Negroes are friends.
Ooh, this is one of my favorite Phil songs. I
Yeah.
love this one. I just love his talking songs. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but something about it just really sticks with me. In the lyric when he says, "In Birmingham, some people chose to fly down the street on a fire from a fire hose." That one like has always stuck with me because like it's just
Mhm.
his like ability for humor.
I love this song lyrically, but the version on the album I don't vibe with. The energy is just so much lower than the talking songs on All the News.
I think his talking songs like are one of those. It's kind of like in the same vein as "I Ain't Marching Anymore." I think like the title track. I think they're better performed like outside, like in front of a crowd. I think
Yeah.
that's like what they're meant for to like.
Exactly.
Yeah, but like you said,
I
Beth,
just
kind of like him, turning this really heavy situation into something humorous. Whenever he's introducing it, I think at Newport 63, take a shot every time we mention Newport. What does he says? In
in
times of
times of deep
tragedy,
tragedy, there's always something of the ridiculous.
of the ridiculous. Yeah, and I think it just shows, not only like finding the humor in it, but saying like, this is so wrong. This is so morally, ethically wrong in the scope of human existence that it is genuinely ridiculous that we as
Mhm.
humans have tolerated it. I think that's ultimately the message of like the talking songs. I think this is a quote that I read somewhere, but like that his music, like topically, his music is so good that you can't argue with it. Like you genuinely cannot argue with a lot of the stuff that he says when he kind of boils everything down to a talking song and says, "Look at how ridiculous this shit is." It's really hard to argue with them. So sometimes I feel like the talking songs are like this is maybe a little bit more effective than like in the heat of the summer because in the heat of the
Yeah.
summer is so sad and so
Heavy.
so deafeningly sad, and this is just saying it's sad, but it's stupid. It is genuinely stupidity.
Yeah, I think kind of
Mhm.
going off that, like, the thing about the talking songs is, like, like, there's always, like, that sentiment that, like, to teach something to somebody, like, you have to be able to, like, write it down in terms that, like, a five-year-old could understand. Like, you have to, like, make it, like, simple to, like, make it
Yeah.
accessible to, like, as many people as possible. And I think that's something that the
Yeah.
talking song embody. Like, he doesn't, like, try to, like, be pretentious about it, and he doesn't try to, like, use all this, like, fancy language and, like, big words. He just, like, tells it as it is.
How did he have more energy at Newport? The man, we know, he had a spinal tap. He was in agony. How did he have more energy at Newport than in the studio recording this song? I would argue and say that it was because he didn't like this album very much.
No, I was even on all the news. Just I think Beth, maybe you said it that the talking songs really just lend themselves to crowds, like to being performed in
Mhm.
front of people and having um that energy. Like Talking of Vietnam is probably my favorite talking song. And the
Mhm. Oh,
Newport
man.
performance of that is so energetic, like, just the audience
Yes.
participation of the song, and even with this one, when you hear the audience laugh and hoot and holler,
Mhm.
that's what it's meant to do, And I think that's maybe why, even though I don't think he necessarily liked I Ain't Marching Anymore and was not having a good time generally when he was recording it, I think that just
Mhm.
it's especially evident in songs like this because he goes and performs them, at Newport, and we have evidence that he went and performed them and they were fun. They were genuinely fun and
Yeah.
energetic, so it makes it much harder to listen to them on the album.
So lyrically, this song is fantastic. Like where we feed our dogs on civil rights. I don't think that was that was in the Newport version. The moderates verse it's almost like a precursor to Love Me I'm a Liberal,
It is.
and it sticks in my head all the time. And for those unfamiliar, it's some say we've passed our darkest hour, those moderates are back in power. They'll listen close with open ears and help us out in a couple 100 years. But don't push them, whatever you do, or else you get those extremists back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar.
He always talks so fondly of 1965 and describes it as such an optimistic year. The album he released that year, like, just doesn't hit that different for me.
And then if you think about like In Concert being released in '66, I think maybe the energy of '65 was
Yeah,
close to
yeah.
like the what he released in '66.
I should say for listeners that this is all speculation, that he didn't like I Ain't Marching Anymore. We don't know this. This was never like explicitly stated anywhere. This is just the vibe that I get. And I mean, there's not a lot of talk about the recording process in either biographies, like how this went. Like, and I feel like that's a shame because I would have liked to know.
I love how he just like dunks on the South like every chance he gets. I love it.
I don't.
Dave Van Ronk doesn't love it.
I love Here's to the State of Mississippi. I love this song. And this song more so I think is justified. I don't know, because Mississippi historically just keeps dropping the ball.
Yeah.
That's one way to put it.
Moving on. Ballad of the Carpenter.
Jesus was a working man, and a hero you will hear, born in the town of Bethlehem, at the turning of the year, at the turning of the year.
Ewan McCall wrote it. I wrote Socialist Jesus.
Jesus, yeah.
Phil, I think he performed it in Lansing in '73 of all times and places, and was like, this is a Marxist read of Jesus Christ, and it's like, I don't know, it's really cool. I like how it examines Christ as a man, as a person, and not as a messiah. This isn't his own lyric, this is Ewan McCall, but wealth and poverty live always side by side. And I said it kind of sticks it to hypocritical Christians, but I said, he's someone who cares about Christ's message over the cultural aspects of Christianity.
Yeah.
Another line that stood out was, the dream of this poor carpenter remains in the hands of you.
That is a very,
it's
line, yeah.
Yeah. Humanizing. Again, I'm not a religious person, but I don't think you have to be to at least appreciate this song, because Phil was Jewish, so like,
yeah.
I very much like the first lyric is Jesus was a working man. Like, this is just about a human. This is telling a story, and I think it's nice that he gave it some attention. Since we don't have too much to say, and since we need to move on, I'm just going to read the liner notes. The State Department has a nasty habit of blocking the entrance of Ewan McCall into this country. Oh, he wasn't even in the country. And undoubtedly one of the reasons is songs like this. All political considerations aside, if you take a serious look at the quality of culture in America, you can see that the State Department can ill afford such a tactic. I love how he didn't really write on the song, just on Ewan McCall.
That just kind of shows how much he talked the talk and he walked the walk when it came to solidarity.
Yeah. He liked lifting others up, and that was great. Days of Decision.
Oh, the shadows of doubt are in many a mind, looking for an answer they're never gonna find. But they better decide, 'cause they're running out of time. For these are the days of decision.
I like it okay. It's fine. Like this is coming from someone who's not a fan of Bob Dylan. But the first thing I wrote was like, this kind of reminds me of The Times Are A-Changin'. Like,
I like that.
I don't want to call it a knockoff, but like that's what it sounds like. I said it feels like the most Dylan of the time inspired song, like Dylan of that time. So yeah, it kind of is a response to The Times Are Changing, but like structurally, it's just, it sounds very similar. Like,
I'm sure he was heavily influenced. We've talked a lot about, Dylan's comments that him writing all the political material was bullshit. And we've talked a lot about how much Phil respected Dylan as a songwriter, as a person, as somebody he looked up to. Obviously this is speculation as much of what we say is, but I'm sure that maybe Dylan's comments had a huge effect on him, and maybe he was like, maybe I should take a whack at it, kind of writing something a little bit more broad, something a little bit more Dylan-esque. But even still, when you get down to it, he has to put his stamp on it, his slightly controversial stamp on it. So like he ends with, you can do what's right or you can do what you are told, which isn't broad. That's not general. That's not up to interpretation. That is very poignant and very driven. Even at his broadest, he still can't help himself but to get political, but to like get down in it.
Mm-hmm. Or there's many a cross that burns in the night.
Yeah.
Or the 3 bodies buried in the Mississippi mud. Like, he couldn't not include these more granular things. As far as like lyrics go, I wrote the fingers of the fire are pointing as they bite. Wow. Very good. And that's another really good alliteration, the fingers of the fire. I feel like I've just been talking and talking and talking, but Beth, how do you feel? Does it make you feel things in your heart?
I like this one. It's not one that I like specifically seek out, but it's not one that I'm gonna like skip if it comes on shuffle.
See, this is a skipper for me. I don't know. I can't really do this one. It's fine. Like, it's good, but it's just like, eh. I feel like Phil's liner notes for Days of Decision hit harder than the song.
The whole album, that is the case.
He said, the American politician has developed into a gutless master of procrastination with a maximum of non-committal statements and the barest minimum of action. This moral vacuum is exceeded only by the apathetic public who allows him to stay in power. How feeble is the effect of a song against such a morass, but here it is.
Love to see it.
Love that. That's,
Go off, Philip! And finally, here's to the state of Mississippi.
Yeah.
Here's to the state of Mississippi. For underneath her borders the devil draws no line. If you drag her muddy rivers, nameless bodies you will find. Oh, the fat trees of the forest have hid 1,000 crimes. The calendar's lying when it reads the present time. Oh,
I love this one. I just like the way he wrote a diss track for a whole state.
Here's to the state of Mississippi is punk.
It is. It's the spirit of punk. Okay, so like the first time I was listening to Phil, I think I had heard Love Me, I'm a Liberal, so I went to this album because it was like the most popular album on Spotify, and just kind of like shuffled through the album and would repeat some songs and would kind of skip through others. And I got to this one and I wasn't quite paying attention until the chorus, Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of. But I remember I wasn't paying attention, and then I heard that and I thought, oh, like, hold up, what? Like, let me start this over. This song lyrically is incredibly strong, and obviously we know how incredible of a writer he was, but his ability to make memorable moments, to make you remember the point of a song using melody is really impressive. You wanna sing along to that part. Like, the
Mhm.
rest of the
Yeah.
song, I don't really care to sing along to, but the chorus, I
Mhm.
sing out every time I hear it. I yell it. You sing the chorus out. It is made to sing along to. And you
Um,
kinda brought up, Dave Van Ronk a bit, kind of concerning Phil's
yeah,
attitude towards the South. And Dave Van Ronk
yeah,
did call him out and say that does perpetuate, like,
yeah.
this notion that the South is the only, region of the country or the only sector of people that are responsible for the violent and rampant racism that exists in America, which is just simply not true. Obviously, it wasn't his intention with the song because he stopped performing it pretty much after Dave Van Ronk pointed that out to him, which I think I love
Mhm.
that because that really shows his dedication to truth and to,
Yeah.
thinking what was right, and he said, you know what, you're right," like, he really took that into consideration.
This one lyric that I wanted to point out that always stuck with me when he said when the black man stands accused, the trial is always short. I think
Yes.
like him calling out like the unfairness of the justice system toward people of color like so long ago was just again like another example of how progressive, like far ahead he was.
Wrapping up, I mean, overall, we've kind of we've dunked so much on I Ain't Marching Anymore. We've kind of established, I mean, our consensus here. People are allowed to disagree, and we don't think our opinions. These are solely our opinions. That's what discussion is for. But personally, I it seems to be the consensus is this is kind of the weakest of the Elektra albums, which is par for the course for a sophomore album. It's fine. Low energy. I did say the songs that shine really shine, but the songs that fall short really fall short. Like they're just like skippable, not very memorable, and that's a shame. I don't think it's a bad album by any means, but it's certainly not one that I pull out to spin very often.
Yeah, most definitely. Agreed.
Y'all want to hear some reviews? Since we just gave our scathing reviews. Okay. San Francisco Chronicle says, Oaks shoots from the hip and his aim is true. Here's to the state of Mississippi is Oaks at his bitter best.
I like that. I
Okay.
like that snappy.
Denver Post, this is a negative one. If he is going to be an entertainer, he is going to have to entertain.
Aw.
Yeah.
Aw.
That's one that Phil would have like. I feel like he would have liked that in like a songbook or something. Like that would be one of the
Yeah.
ones. I feel like he saw them. He was like, "Yeah, he loved that one."
I mean, as harsh as it is, I am inclined to understand why they said this. It's just like it's just so it's I feel so mean.
I was so scared that
Just
like I would come on
trashing
here.
our boy.
I was like, "Oh my god, like I'm gonna be the only one who doesn't really like this album."
No.
It's
It's not that
okay.
I dislike it. It's just not my favorite.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny because it's like we I shouldn't say we worship Phil, but we love Phil so much. I don't want to say we hold him to a high standard, but it's like I guess it does show that like we're not entirely biased. Like we know
We're not like
Like we know he's
what
capable of
everything
doing
is.
better.
yeah, we know what works for us, and like we've just seen so much better from him, so it's like it's just fine. The Wichita Eagle and Beacon said won't win any fans among the DAR. Haha. It has a powerful impact, one of the finest albums of topical songs available.
I mean, that's fair.
I feel like both the positive and negative reviews are right. Like, it's they're right to an extent. Like they're all valid. The American Record Guide said the journalese of the Oaks songs induces the same emotional numbness as the regular reading of the daily newspapers. See, I feel like I feel like that's not quite as fair because I Ain't Marching Anymore doesn't have a lot of journalese.
I feel like that would have
It's-
applied better
it's-
to all the news.
Yeah, definitely. Those are the reviews I have.
They're all fair, except the last
Yeah.
one. You know.
Oh man, I just love the entertainment one.
Yeah, it
he
seems
was
like it
hilarious.
was like
that was boring.
yeah, it feels like the last one was at least it was like they were just expecting the same thing. They just knew what Phil was known for, so it was like, just a journalist. Do we want to touch on the album art for I Ain't Marching Anymore a little bit?
I think I really do enjoy all of the album art, but this is specifically very cool because it's all these like political headlines and stuff torn apart to expose a peace sign, which is a little hokey.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't love that message personally. But it's sweet, and I think it embodies Phil at this time in his life and in his career.
Oh, absolutely.
I like how the peace sign is the only clear message on that wall. You can't suss out like any of the messages on the signs, like on the posters or anything. So like it's all ripped away to reveal the only thing that matters, I guess, out of all of these things is peace.
But it is a contrast to the content of the album for Phil, considering how intense he is and how explicit he is in his political leanings. This album really is this is the most moderate. I guess I'm wrong to say that this embodies him. It really doesn't, because like I don't think he ever had that like peace, love, and happiness vibe that a lot of people, a lot of like songwriters in the 60s had. I think he always knew that there's gonna have to be conflict. Like there is conflict is absolutely necessary to achieve any sort of social progress. So I think that now that I'm thinking about it, I kind of retract my initial comment that I think that this is Phil, because it's not really. I mean, I think the like how naive it is maybe a little bit more in line with what I was saying, because he is very naive still at this point in his career. But yeah, it's very interesting. It almost makes me feel like, was this his idea? Because it does not vibe with his general message.
I love this cover because he looked at it and he was like, I look so cool here. Like, he thought, like, he has that serious look on his face. Like, because, like, he said that thing about, like, hating candid shots and stuff like that. Like, he only ever wanted to be photographed, like, posing. And he looked at this and he was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
That was his movie star moment.
Well, that is I Ain't Marching Anymore. And I would like to formally apologize to Phil and to anyone who really likes this album, but that is my main feeling. It's just like it's fine.
It's there.
Like it's good, but in terms of Phil, yeah, thank you two for coming on.
Woohoo! You're welcome.
I
Everybody's
appreciate you
welcome.
both. You've been listening to God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Oakes. Join us next time for Part 3, Phil Oakes in Concert. This program was created and written by me, Tori Nelson, edited by Tori Nelson and Marie McCarthy, and produced by Marie McCarthy. Special thanks to Zachary Stevenson for lending his voice to written quotes of Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan. You can support Zach by checking out his website, zacharystevenson.com. Special thanks to Mackenzie Solders and Elizabeth Morris. Music written and performed by Phil Oakes. Farewells and fantasies, folks.